It had been years since anyone had heard from the Veracians, a once thriving alien race known for their incredible intelligence and vast cities. They had long since been abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. They were once powerful, their technology far beyond that of many civilizations, but now their world was empty. Their cities, though still standing, had fallen into ruin, their streets overgrown with plants and trees, as if nature itself had taken over. The Veracians had sent out signals for help many times, but every time their pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Other civilizations saw their messages, but for reasons unknown, they chose to ignore them. Some said the Veracians had angered too many powerful enemies. Others claimed the race was simply too different, too strange. Whatever the reason, the Veracians were forgotten, left to struggle alone. Then, one day, Earth's new galactic defense fleet picked up something unusual. It wasn't much, a faint signal buried beneath layers of space noise, but it was enough to catch the attention of the fleet's commander, Captain Sarah Mitchell. She had been leading missions for years, but this was unlike anything she had encountered before. The signal was coming from deep within the Veracian system, a place no one had bothered to visit in centuries. Captain Mitchell had spent her career studying the galaxy, and she had heard stories of the Veracians, stories of a race that had once been the jewel of the galaxy, a race whose knowledge of science and technology was unparalleled. Their empire had stretched across dozens of star systems, yet now they were nearly forgotten. Sarah couldn't ignore the signal. It was a cry for help, and she knew that if anyone could offer aid, it was humanity. As Sarah stood before her crew, she felt a sense of determination. They had come so far as a species, learning from their mistakes and growing stronger with each passing day. Humanity had faced its own struggles, wars, near extinction, and countless battles for survival, but they had always come out stronger. And now they had the chance to help a race that had been left behind. The decision was made. The Resolute, Earth's most advanced warship, would travel to the Veracian system and investigate the signal. There was no telling what they would find, but Sarah was determined to discover the truth. As the ship prepared for launch, Sarah's mind raced. She had studied the history of the Veracians, but there was so much that remained a mystery. What had happened to them? Why had no one come to their aid? Had they angered the wrong people, or was there something more to the story? Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Veracians' fate than met the eye. The journey to the Veracian system was long, and as the Resolute cruised through the stars, Sarah couldn't help but think about the stories of old. The Veracians were said to have mastered technologies that could reshape entire planets. Some believed their knowledge of artificial intelligence was light years ahead of anything humanity had achieved. And yet, despite their brilliance, they were abandoned. When the Resolute finally reached the outskirts of the Veracian system, the crew was stunned. The once thriving planet appeared lifeless. The cities, though majestic in their design, were now eerily quiet. From orbit, the surface looked like a patchwork of deserted areas and abandoned structures. Sarah's heart sank as she gazed at the planet below. She knew that the Veracians had faced hardship, but seeing their world in such a state was still a shock. She ordered the crew to prepare for landing, determined to find out what had happened to the race that had once been so great. As they descended into the atmosphere, the ship was met with silence. No signs of life, no defense systems, nothing. The city below seemed frozen in time. As the Resolute touched down on the outskirts of one of the abandoned cities, Sarah and her team made their way into the streets. The air was thick with the scent of overgrown plants, and the buildings, though grand, showed signs of decay. It was as if the planet had been left to rot. They wandered through the streets, looking for any signs of life. But there was nothing. No bustling crowds, no alien sounds or voices, only silence. Then, as they turned a corner, they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. A group of Veracians, their faces gaunt, their bodies thin. They looked up at Sarah and her crew with a mixture of hope and fear. For the first time in centuries, someone had come. Someone had heard their cry. Sarah approached them carefully, her voice calm. "We're here to help." The Varatians said nothing at first, only staring at her. Their eyes were full of sadness, but there was a flicker of something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, their race wouldn't be forgotten after all. As Sarah looked into their eyes, she realized this was only the beginning. The Varakians had been abandoned for far too long, but now humanity was here, ready to change their fate. And Sarah was determined to see it through. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the middle of the abandoned Varakian city, trying to make sense of the scene before her. The once grand buildings that had towered over this alien world were now crumbling, their walls cracked and faded with age. The streets, once filled with alien voices and bustling life, were eerily silent. The air was heavy with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional rustling of plants that had long since claimed the land. The small group of Varakians that had gathered to meet Sarah's crew were a sight she would never forget. They were thin, their skin pale and worn. Their eyes, however, were full of something she hadn't expected: hope. Hope that humanity, the very species that had once been struggling to survive, had come to their aid after centuries of being ignored. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. It was the Varakian leader, a woman named Ilara, her once beautiful face now marked with lines of exhaustion and sadness. "You are human," she said softly, as though testing the word. Her voice trembled, but it carried a strange sense of longing. Sarah nodded, taking a careful step forward. "Yes, we received your signal. We're here to help." Ilara blinked, as if the words were too difficult to believe. For so long, the Varakians had been alone, abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. Every time they sent a distress call, no one had answered. For years, they had fought to survive on their own. But as their numbers dwindled, so did their hope. But now, with Sarah and her crew standing before them, something had shifted. Perhaps the galaxy hadn't forgotten them after all. We thought no one would come," Ilara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We were abandoned, left to die." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. No one should have been left to suffer like this, abandoned by every civilization they had once called an ally. But the Varatians were survivors, and despite everything they had endured, they still stood strong. Sarah could see the resilience in their eyes. "We're here now," Sarah said firmly. "And we're not going to let you fade into history. Earth won't turn its back on you. We'll help you rebuild." Ilara studied Sarah for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust her words. Finally, she nodded. We need your help. We've tried everything, but it's too late for us. The Skrell are coming. They've been watching us for years. They want to finish what they started. We have no way to stop them." Sarah frowned at the mention of the Skrell. She had heard of them, an aggressive alien race that had caused chaos across the galaxy. Known for their ruthless tactics and overwhelming military power, the Skrell had never shown any interest in peace. If they were targeting the Varatians, it would be a battle unlike any Earth had faced before. "We won't let the Skrull destroy you," Sarah said with determination. "Tell me everything you know. We'll find a way to protect you." Ilara's eyes softened with gratitude. "There's not much left to tell. The Skrell have been watching us for years. They know we're weak, and they plan to strike soon. We've tried to hide, but our resources are running low. We have no way to defend ourselves, and we cannot escape." Sarah could hear the desperation in Ilara's voice, but she refused to accept defeat. She had faced impossible odds before, and she wasn't about to let this ancient race fade away without a fight. She turned to her crew, who had gathered around, their faces filled with concern and resolve. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We'll work together. We have the technology and the willpower to protect you." The Varakians were hesitant at first, unsure of whether to trust the humans. They had been let down so many times before, their faith in others shattered by years of abandonment. But there was something in Sarah's words, something in the way she carried herself, that made them believe. Perhaps this time, things would be different. "Thank you," Ilara said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "We never thought we would find help. We thought we were alone." "You're not alone anymore," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "We're in this together." Over the next few days, Sarah and her crew worked alongside the Veracians to assess their situation. The planet's once thriving cities had been reduced to ruins, and the Veracians had lost much of their advanced technology. However, they still had knowledge, ancient blueprints for weapons and technology that had been passed down through generations. The Veracians were skilled engineers and scientists, their minds sharp despite the years of hardship. The next few days were a blur of activity as the humans and Veracians worked together to repair the ancient cannon. It was housed in a massive underground facility, hidden beneath the ruins of a once great city. The structure was old, but the technology within was astounding. Sarah watched as the Veracian engineers worked alongside her crew, carefully analyzing the weapon and making adjustments. As the cannon neared completion, the atmosphere on the planet became tense. The Skrull were drawing closer, and every day that passed brought them one step closer to the inevitable confrontation. Sarah knew they didn't have much time. If the Skrull arrived before they were ready, the battle would be lost before it even began. Meanwhile, Sarah spent hours in the command center, coordinating with her crew and making preparations for the defense of the planet. They had to set up energy shields around the cities, create safe zones for the Veracian civilians, and ensure that their weapons were ready. The Veracians had never fought a war like this before. They were a peaceful race, not built for combat. But they had learned quickly, and Sarah had seen their determination. They would fight for their survival. The day finally arrived when the Skrull fleet entered the Veracian system. The sky above the planet darkened as massive warships appeared on the horizon. Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't let fear take over. She knew that her crew, the Veracians, and the Resolute were ready. They had a plan, and they were going to use everything they had to protect the Veracians' home. As the first Skrull ship entered the atmosphere, Sarah gave the command. "Prepare for battle." The sky above the Veracian planet grew dark as the first of the Skrull ships descended. Their sheer size and imposing presence cast a shadow over the city ruins below. Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the scene unfold on the massive view screen. The tension was palpable. The Skrull fleet had arrived. The Skrull warships were unlike anything Sarah had seen before. They were enormous, their sleek, dark exteriors reflecting the dim light of the planet's sun. Each ship had the unmistakable markings of a highly advanced military force: sharp angles, reinforced hulls, and powerful energy weapons mounted along the sides. These ships were designed for destruction, and they were heading straight for the heart of the Veracian resistance. "We've detected their fleet, Captain," reported Lieutenant Harris, a member of Sarah's crew. His voice was steady, but Sarah could see the worry in his eyes. "The first wave is entering the atmosphere. They're targeting the central cities. Deploy the shields now," Sarah commanded, "and prepare the weapon systems. We need to hold them off as long as we can." The Resolute's massive shields flickered to life, surrounding the planet like a protective barrier. At the same time, Sarah watched as the Veracian engineers worked frantically, completing the final adjustments to the ancient energy cannon. She had her doubts about its effectiveness, but this was their best chance. If the cannon worked, it could be their one shot at turning the tide. "Captain, the Skrull have launched their first wave of fighters," reported Lieutenant Harris, his fingers flying over the console. "They're targeting the shield generators. Take them out before they can cause any damage," Sarah ordered. "Activate the ship's weapons. Let's show them what Earth can do." The Resolute's weapons came to life, firing powerful energy blasts at the Skrull fighters. The Skrull ships were fast, darting through the sky like predators on the hunt, but the humans had trained for this moment. They were ready. Sarah's crew worked in unison, targeting the Skrull fighters with precision. The first few blasts hit their mark, but the Skrull ships didn't falter. They regrouped and came back with even more ferocity. The battle had begun. Meanwhile, on the surface, the Verakians were scrambling to activate their defensive systems. Their cities were still vulnerable, but they had fortified the most important areas with energy shields. Sarah could see their resolve. Despite being outmatched in terms of technology and resources, the Verakians were determined. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. The Skrell had begun to land their massive warships on the surface, and their ground troops were starting to pour out. The Verakians had no experience fighting such a powerful enemy, but they had Earth's support, and that was enough to give them hope. "Deploy the planetary cannons," Sarah commanded, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to stop those troops before they get too far." The ancient Verakian cannons, long dormant, roared to life, sending blasts of energy into the air. The Skrull troops on the ground were scattered as explosions rang out across the landscape. It wasn't enough to defeat them, but it slowed their advance. The Skrull were powerful, but the Verakians had something they didn't: the will to fight for their survival. Back on the Resolute, Sarah's crew was engaged in a fierce firefight with the Skrull ships. The Resolute's weapons were proving to be effective, but the Skrull ships were heavily armored, and their energy shields absorbed most of the blasts. It was a stalemate, and time was running out. "We need to buy more time," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing as she watched the battle unfold. "Lieutenant Harris, can we activate the cannon yet?" Harris looked up from his console. "We're almost there, Captain. Just a few more adjustments." Sarah's heart raced. The energy cannon was their last line of defense, and she could feel the pressure mounting. If they didn't activate it soon, the Skrell would overwhelm the Verakians, and there would be nothing left to protect. "Captain, the Skrell are advancing on the main city," Ilara reported, her voice tense. "If we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything." "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "Activate the cannon." A loud hum filled the air as the ancient Verakian weapon powered up. The ground shook beneath their feet as the cannon unleashed a massive burst of energy, sending a shockwave rippling across the sky. The blast struck one of the Skrull warships directly, tearing through its shields and causing it to explode in a massive fireball. For a moment, there was silence. The Skrull forces paused, clearly stunned by the unexpected attack. The cannon had worked. Did we hit them?" Ilara understood, Captain," Harris responded, already moving to relay the orders. Sarah turned to Ilara, who had been standing silently beside her. The Verakian leader was watching the battlefield, her gaze distant and filled with concern. "Ilara, are you sure your people can hold the line?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but urgent. "The Skrell are powerful, and I'm not sure the cannon will be enough to stop them." Ilara's expression was grave, but there was determination in her eyes. "We will do everything we can. Our people are fighters. We've faced hardship before, and we will face it again." Sarah nodded, appreciating the strength of the Verakian people. They had already shown immense courage, and now it was up to the humans to stand beside them. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Verakian soldiers were preparing for what they knew would be their toughest battle yet. In the eastern sector, the Skrull tanks were advancing, their massive forms crushing everything in their path. The Verakian resistance had set up a series of energy shields around the power plant, but they wouldn't last long against the sheer firepower of the Skrull. "Commander," a young Verakian officer said, looking nervously at the approaching tanks. "They're coming. We don't have much time." Commander Rovan, a battle-hardened veteran of many wars, turned to the officer with a steely gaze. "We fight with everything we have," he said firmly. "We will not let them take this planet." The ground trembled as the first of the Skrull tanks reached the perimeter of the power plant's shields. The Verakian soldiers fired their blasters, but the Skrull tanks barely flinched. Their shields absorbed the incoming fire, and with one powerful blast from their cannon, they shattered the energy barrier surrounding the plant. "Get ready," Commander Rovan shouted as the tanks began to roll forward. "We hold this line. no matter what. Just as the Skrull tanks advanced, the sky above them grew brighter. The sound of approaching engines reached the Verakan soldiers, and they looked up in unison. A fleet of human ships, including the Resolute, was descending through the atmosphere, their engines roaring as they entered the fray. The Veratians' hearts lifted. They weren't alone. Sarah's voice came over the comms. "Verakan forces, this is Captain Mitchell of the Resolute. We're landing to support you. We'll provide air support while you take care of the tanks. Prepare to receive reinforcements." Commander Rovin's eyes widened. "We have help," he said, his voice filled with relief. The human ships began to rain down fire upon the Skrull tanks, their energy weapons finding weak spots in the Skrull armor. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the Skrull tanks were struck one by one, each blast sending a shockwave through the air. But the battle wasn't over yet. Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Skrull were fierce, but they hadn't faced the combined force of humanity and the Verakans. The two sides were fighting together now, united by a common enemy and a shared determination to protect the planet they both called home. On the ground, Veratian soldiers rallied, taking advantage of the chaos created by the human ships. With the tanks distracted, they launched a coordinated strike, using guerrilla tactics to take down the Skrull ground troops. The battle raged on, but the Verakans were not backing down. "Keep pushing forward," Commander Rovin yelled, leading his troops into the fray. "We will not let them destroy our home." Sarah watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Resolute, her heart swelling with pride. The Verakans were fighting with everything they had, and now the humans were fighting alongside them. It was a testament to the strength of both species, but there was still much to be done. The Skrull forces were vast, and the battle was far from won. Sarah knew that they had to press forward, together. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice steady and determined. "For the Veratians, for Earth, and for the future." The battle on the surface of Verac was far from over, but something had shifted in the air. The Skrull had underestimated the human resolve, as well as the determination of the Veratians. With each passing hour, the alliance between the two species grew stronger, fueled by the shared purpose of protecting their world. The Skrull war machines were relentless, but the combined forces of the Resolute and the Veratian resistance were proving to be a much tougher adversary than the Skrull had anticipated. On the ground, Commander Rovin stood at the front lines, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes burned with unwavering resolve. His soldiers had been fighting for hours, and they were tired, but the sight of the human ships swooping down from the sky had reinvigorated them. "We hold the line," Rovin shouted to his troops, his voice a beacon of strength in the chaos. "We fight for Verac. We fight for all who call this planet home." His words echoed across the battlefield, and the Veracian soldiers, despite their exhaustion, found new energy in his command. They pushed forward, firing their blasters with precision, targeting the weak spots in the Skrull tanks and warships. Each shot that landed was a victory, but they knew the fight was far from over. Above them, the Resolute and the other human ships were locked in a fierce aerial battle with the Skrull fleet. Energy blasts streaked through the air, lighting up the dark sky like fireworks. The human ships were agile and fast, dodging the Skrull fire while returning their own devastating blows. The Skrull, in their arrogance, had expected an easy victory. They hadn't expected humans to be so resourceful, so adaptable. Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her eyes scanning the battlefield below. She had seen many battles in her time, but this one was different. The stakes were higher, and the consequences of failure were too great to imagine. Yet she could feel a change in the air. The Verakians were beginning to fight like never before, and the human forces were matching their determination. "Captain, the Skrull are starting to retreat," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice filled with surprise. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What? Are they pulling back?" "It seems so, Captain," Harris confirmed. "Their forces are scattered, and many of their ships are breaking off to flee the planet. They didn't expect the resistance to hold out this long. Sarah couldn't believe it. The Skrull were known for their overwhelming power, and their reputation for crushing entire civilizations was legendary. To see them retreating was an unexpected victory, but Sarah knew better than to assume the battle was won just yet. "Don't get complacent," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to stay focused. There's still a lot of work to be done." On the ground, the Veracian soldiers continued to push forward, taking advantage of the Skrull's disarray. They were relentless in their assault, knowing that this was their chance to turn the tide once and for all. The Skrull had been overconfident, and now they were paying the price. "Commander, we've taken out their lead tank," one of Rovin's officers reported, excitement in his voice. "We're pushing them back." Rovin nodded, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Good. Keep up the pressure. Don't let them regroup." The Veracians had come a long way since the first attack. They had fought hard, and now they were fighting smarter. The humans had shared their tactics, and the Veracians had adapted them to their own strengths. It was a new kind of warfare, one built on unity, not just firepower. Just as the battle seemed to be turning in their favor, the Skrull commander, a towering figure of dark metal and energy, appeared on the battlefield. His ship hovered above, and he looked down at the Veracian forces with disdain. He had not expected to face such resistance. He had underestimated the power of this small, forgotten planet. With a wave of his hand, the Skrull commander activated a weapon of incredible power. A massive pulse of energy shot from his ship, crashing into the ground and creating a shockwave that sent soldiers flying. The earth trembled beneath them, and the Veracian forces staggered. Rovin quickly regained his footing and shouted into his communicator, "We need air support now." The Skrull commander is using a weapon that could turn the tide in their favor. Within moments, Sarah's voice came over the comms. "Commander, we see the Skrull ship. We're engaging now." The human ships, already engaged with the Skrull fleet, shifted their focus to the new threat. Sarah knew that the Skrull commander had to be stopped, or all of their hard work would be for nothing. "Prepare for a direct strike," Sarah ordered. "Target the Skrull ship's power core. We need to bring it down." The Resolute and the other human ships veered toward the Skrull commander's vessel, their weapons charging for a final decisive blow. As they fired, the sky lit up with energy blasts, and the world below seemed to hold its breath. The Skrull commander's ship shimmered as the blast hit its shield, but the shield began to crack under the pressure. "Hold steady," Sarah urged, her grip tightening on the controls. With one final burst of energy, the Skrull commander's ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave sent ripples through the air, and the battlefield fell silent for a moment. The Skrull forces, now leaderless and scattered, began to retreat in earnest. Their once organized assault had crumbled in the face of an alliance that refused to back down. On the ground, the Veracians cheered as the last of the Skrull forces fled, their ships retreating into the atmosphere. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the Veracians and humans felt a sense of victory. "We did it," Commander Rovin said, his voice filled with awe. Sarah looked out over the battlefield, her heart swelling with pride. The Alliance had held, and Virac had been saved. But the journey was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead. Yet, one thing was certain: the humans and the Veracians would face them together. And with each victory, their bond would only grow stronger. As the sun began to set over the horizon, the survivors stood tall, knowing that they had changed the course of history. Together, they had defended the planet that had once been abandoned. And together, they would build a future worth fighting for. The smoke from the battlefield still lingered in the air, a reminder of the fierce struggle that had unfolded across Virac. The Skrull fleet had been broken, their forces scattered and retreating, leaving the planet and its people to heal. Yet, despite the victory, the war was far from over. The Skrull had been a powerful force, and their departure was but a temporary respite. Sarah Mitchell stood with Commander Rovan on the steps of the Verakian Command Center, looking out over the planet that had been saved. The landscape, once scared by the fires of war, now seemed to glow in the aftermath, the orange light of the setting sun casting long shadows over the land. It was a symbol of the new beginning that awaited. "We've won this battle," Rovan said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But the Skrull won't forget so easily. They'll be back." Sarah nodded. "I know, but we've proven something today. We've shown them that we're not easy prey. We can fight back, and we can win." Rovan turned to her, his expression serious but grateful. "You brought us hope when we had none. The humans, they are unlike any allies we could have asked for." Sarah smiled, though it was a weary one. "It wasn't just the humans. It was you and your people, Rovan. You fought for your world, for your future. That's what made the difference." For a moment, they stood in silence, both of them thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The Verakians had once been a proud people, but they had been abandoned by every other civilization, left to fend for themselves against the Skrull. They had fought alone for so long, and they had been close to losing everything. But then the humans had arrived, and everything had changed. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of calm wash over her. The Verakians were no longer alone. Together, the humans and the Verakians had created something stronger than just a military alliance. They had formed a bond that would carry them into the future, one that no enemy could easily break. Back at the human base, the soldiers were celebrating their hard-won victory. The tension of the past weeks had finally been replaced with relief and joy. It was a rare moment of peace, and the soldiers took full advantage, sharing stories and laughter as they gathered around the campfires. For Sarah, though, the work was far from over. She had always been one to focus on the next step, never allowing herself to linger too long on the past. There was still much to do. The Verakians would need support to rebuild their cities, their military, and their way of life. The Skrull had been defeated for now, but Sarah knew they would return. They would need to prepare for that. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Rovan walking toward her, his usual serious demeanor replaced by a hint of something softer. "We've set up a meeting with the leaders of the Verakian councils," Rovan said. "We want to make sure the alliance between our people remains strong. We need to discuss our next steps, what happens after this war." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure the councils are ready for that conversation? They've been through a lot." Rovan nodded. "They know we need to rebuild, but they also know that we need to continue our partnership with the humans. Without that, we would have lost everything." Sarah's heart swelled with pride at his words. The Verakians had come a long way. She could still remember the distrust and uncertainty that had hung in the air when they first arrived. Now the Verakians were willing to commit to a future built together, not just for survival, but for a new beginning. "I'll be there," Sarah said, determination in her voice. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Rovan smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you, Sarah." As they walked toward the command center, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that lay ahead. There were challenges to come, obstacles that would require every ounce of strength and resourcefulness they had. But for the first time, she felt truly hopeful. She could see the future ahead, a future where humanity and the Verakians stood side by side, facing whatever came next. Hours later, the leaders of the Verakian councils gathered in a grand hall, a symbol of the unity they had fought so hard to achieve. Rovan and Sarah stood at the front, ready to speak about the future that awaited them. The room fell silent as they addressed the councils, their words a promise of what was to come. "We fought together," Sarah began, her voice steady and strong. "And we've won. But this victory is only the beginning. Together, we will rebuild Verac, and we will prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. We will face them with courage, with unity, and with the knowledge that we are not alone." Rovan stepped forward, his voice filled with conviction. This is not just an alliance between two species. This is the beginning of something much greater. The Skrull were only the first test. There are others out there who will try to destroy us. But we will stand strong together. The Varatian leaders nodded, their faces filled with determination. It was clear that they had come to a decision, one that would shape their future for generations to come. "We will continue our partnership with the humans," one of the council leaders said. "We will work together to build a future that is stronger than the past, and we will make sure that no one ever forgets what we've accomplished here." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls as the Varatians and humans stood together, united by the bond they had forged in the fire of battle. For the first time in generations, the Varatians looked to the future with hope in their hearts. The galaxy had once ignored them, abandoned them to fight alone. But now, with the humans by their side, they knew they had a future worth fighting for. And as the stars above began to twinkle in the vastness of space, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The journey had been long, but the road ahead was brighter than ever before. Together, they would face whatever the universe had in store for them. And no matter what came next, they knew they would never be alone again.